It was supposed to be the fresh start I needed. After everything that had happened, the quiet town of Ridgewood, nestled between rolling hills and endless fields, seemed like the perfect place to escape my past. My son Jamie and I arrived in late summer, the air thick with the scent of pine trees and blooming wildflowers. From the moment we stepped out of the car and into the small 2-story house I'd rented, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. But as the days wore on, I couldn't shake the sense that something was lurking beneath the town's peaceful exterior. Everyone seemed nice enough. The neighbors waved as we passed. The grocery clerk greeted us with a warm smile. But there was an undercurrent, a feeling that people were watching, judging. Still, I tried to ignore it. After all, moving here was about healing, about giving Jamie, my quiet, introspective 10-year-old, a chance to start over after his father's sudden death 2 years ago. I'd lost my husband in a car accident on a rainy November night, and since then, life had felt like it was unraveling. Jamie stopped talking to his friends, withdrew into himself, and I felt like I was failing him. So Ridgewood was supposed to be our clean slate, a new home, a new beginning. It didn't take long to meet our first neighbor. Mrs. Hastings lived next door, a widow in her 60s, who seemed to always be working in her garden. She had the kind of house you'd expect from a woman who took pride in appearances. Neatly trimmed hedges, flower beds bursting with color, and not a blade of grass out of place. "You must be the new family," she said, appearing at the fence one afternoon while I was unpacking boxes on the front porch. Her smile was polite but tight, as though she was already measuring me up. "That's right. I'm Laura, and this is Jamie," I replied, gesturing to my son who was sitting on the steps, head buried in a book. "Welcome to Ridgewood. You'll find it's a quiet place mostly, but we look out for each other here." Her words were friendly, but there was something unsettling in the way she said them. Still, I thanked her, trying to push the feeling aside. Over the next few days, we met more of the neighbors. There was the Caldwell family across the street, Tim and Sarah with their 2 teenage daughters, and Mr. Grayson, an older man who lived alone 2 houses down. Everyone seemed polite, if a little distant. Ridgewood, it appeared, was the kind of place where people valued their privacy. Yet, there was one house, the one at the end of our street, that no one ever mentioned. A tall, dilapidated Victorian that looked as though it hadn't been touched in years. Its windows were dark, the paint was peeling, and the overgrown yard was like a jungle compared to the neat lawn surrounding it. Whenever I asked about it, people would change the subject, their eyes flicking away as if they didn't want to acknowledge it. Mrs. Hastings had once said, "Some places are better left alone," in response to my curious question about who lived there. It piqued my interest, but I thought better of prying further. A week after settling in, something strange happened. Jamie had gone to bed, and I was tidying up the living room when there was a knock at the door. It was late. Too late for visitors. I hesitated before opening it, but when I did, no one was there. Just a small envelope lying on the porch. There was no return address, no name on the envelope, only the word "welcome" written in neat cursive on the front. My curiosity got the better of me, so I opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper with a strange message. "Not everything in Ridgewood is as it seems. Keep an eye on your son." My stomach flipped as I reread the words. It felt like a warning, but from who and why? I rushed upstairs to check on Jamie, half expecting something to be wrong. But there he was, fast asleep in bed, his breathing slow and steady. I watched him for a moment, my heart pounding. Maybe it was just some prank, some strange local initiation for new residents. I told myself not to overthink it, but the message stayed with me, gnawing at the back of my mind. Over the next few days, life returned to its usual rhythm. Jamie started school, and I threw myself into work, trying to get back into the groove of writing again. But Ridgewood's strange energy kept pulling me in, especially the old Victorian house at the end of the street. One evening, after dinner, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. Jamie was busy with his homework, and the cool night air felt refreshing after hours indoors. As I passed the old Victorian, something caught my eye. In one of the upper windows, I saw a figure. A woman, I thought, standing there, looking out into the street. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. I hadn't seen anyone go in or out of that house since we'd moved here, and yet, there she was, a shadowy figure, just standing and watching. A chill ran down my spine as I stood frozen, Izrania unsure of what to do. Then, just as suddenly as I'd noticed her, she disappeared from view. I hurried home, my heart racing. Had anyone else seen her? When I mentioned it to Mrs. Hastings the next day, she gave me a tight-lipped smile and said, "You're imagining things, dear. No one's lived in that house for years." But I knew what I'd seen, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the woman in the window was real. The more I tried to push the strange occurrences out of my mind, the more they seemed to pile up. Jamie started acting differently. At first, I chalked it up to the adjustment of moving to a new place, but then he began asking questions about the Victorian house. "Mom, do you know who used to live there?" he asked one afternoon as we walked home from school. "No, I don't," I admitted. "Why do you ask?" He shrugged, but there was something in his eyes that worried me. "I just heard some kids talking about it. They said it's haunted." I forced a laugh, trying to ease the tension I felt growing in my chest. "Haunted, huh? Well, I'm sure it's just old and creepy. No ghosts." But as the days passed, Jamie became more obsessed with the house. He'd stand at the window in his room, staring down the street as though waiting for something. I tried to talk to him about it, but he would just shrug me off, retreating further into himself. Then one day, I found an old photograph tucked inside one of the kitchen cabinets. It was faded, the edges yellowed with age, but the image was unmistakable. It was the Victorian house. In the photo, a family stood in front of it. A man, a woman, and a little girl. They were smiling, but there was something off about the picture, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I flipped the photo over, and my heart stopped. Written in small, neat handwriting were the words, "They're still here." That night, I couldn't sleep. The photograph and the strange letter played over and over in my mind. Who were they? And why did it feel like everything in this town was leading back to that house? I tossed and turned for hours, but eventually, exhaustion overtook me. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. At first, I thought it was Jamie, but when I checked his room, he was sound asleep. The footsteps grew louder, and I realized they were coming from outside. I moved to the window and peered out into the darkness. There, standing in front of the old Victorian house, was Jamie. My heart leaped into my throat as I threw on my robe and raced downstairs. I had no idea how he'd gotten outside without waking me, but I didn't care. I just needed to get him back inside, safe. "Jamie!" I shouted as I rushed across the lawn. But he didn't respond. He stood motionless, staring up at the house as though entranced by something I couldn't see. When I finally reached him, I grabbed his shoulders and shook him gently. "Jamie, what are you doing out here?" His eyes were wide, but he didn't speak. Slowly, he turned his gaze toward the upper window of the house, the same window where I'd seen the woman. And this time, she was there again, staring down at us. Fear surged through me, and I yanked Jamie back toward our house. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The next morning, I decided enough was enough. I couldn't ignore the strange things happening anymore. I had to know the truth. I went to the town's small library and spent hours digging through old records, searching for anything that might explain the mystery of the Victorian house. What I found left me shaken. Decades ago, the house had belonged to the Darnell family, the same family in the photograph I'd found. They were well known in Ridgewood, but tragedy struck one night when a fire broke out, trapping the family inside. The parents died, but the little girl was never found. Some said she perished in the fire, while others believed she had escaped, only to disappear into the woods. As I read the articles, a sinking feeling settled in my stomach. The woman I'd seen in the window wasn't just a ghost, she was real. Or at least, she had been. And whatever presence lingered in that house had drawn Jamie in. When I got home that evening, I found another letter on the porch. This time, it was more direct. "Leave Ridgewood before it's too late. They're watching." I didn't need any more warnings. Jamie and I packed our bags that night, and by morning, we were gone. As we drove away, I couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror, back toward the old Victorian house. In the distance, I saw a figure standing by the window watching us leave. Months have passed since we left Ridgewood, and life has finally started to feel normal again. Jamie is doing better, and I found peace in knowing that we escaped whatever haunted that town. But sometimes, late at night, I still wonder about the woman in the window. Who was she really? And what did she want? I'll never know for sure, but one thing is certain. Ridgewood wasn't the fresh start I thought it would be, and I'm just glad we got out before it was too late.